Welcome to the Bagel Logic Podcast, the show where Papa Tom spreads wisdom like a smear of cream cheese on an everything bagel. Here's your host, Thom Jennings.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Bagel Logic Podcast. And as always, I just want to thank you. I have been doing real well. I'm very pleased with the progress of the listens and the comments. We had a nice review that was posted the other day, so if you could please keep them coming, I appreciate it. Today's topic is marriage counseling fails. And I want to preface this with a disclaimer, warning, what a caveat, I don't know what you want to call it. But marriage counseling works for some people. It does. And I don't want this to turn into an episode about how marriage counseling is fruitless and it's a waste of time or a waste of money. Everybody has their own experiences with marriage counselors, and I know people that have gone to marriage counseling and have had excellent experiences. I will be talking about two experiences today of mine that were horrific experiences. And I do that because I hope that people that are listening that are maybe considering marriage counseling or even are in any stage of a serious relationship can get something out of my tales of woe or tales of warning in terms of not just marriage counseling, but the status of a relationship, how to maintain it, how to end it, how to repair it, if it's even possible to repair. And I have the benefit in this case of a great deal of hindsight. My ex-wife and I split up in 2001. It's a pretty incredible to think about. So that is 21 years ago. And you would think some people say, 21 years, you must be completely over it. But anyone that has gone through a divorce or is going through a divorce knows that there's always going to be some scars that remain. But ultimately, like any situation, you have to find meaning in it. You have to find lessons in it. And if there are some lessons that you can share with other people, then on some level, you should probably do that. So that's what I'll be doing today. Now, my ex-wife, I was thinking about this as I was walking the dogs today. And my typical preparation for a podcast is I will have a topic that will kind of come to the top of mind. And I'll ruminate on it and eventually put some stuff down to, they used to say put it down to paper, but I'll usually get a Google Doc form and I'll hit some key bullet points and whatnot. But I was thinking about it today as I was walking my dogs, and I was like, man, that was a long time ago. It really was. But I was trying to figure out how to diplomatically, or at least in a way, you speak about her, whether it be using her real first name or not. Now, when we were going through our divorce, I had a very close friend that kind of helped me through the divorce, and she gave me the name Frank. So she told me that I could never say my ex-wife's real first name. So instead I had to use the name Frank. So I think I'm going to use the name Frank today for my ex-wife, which there's a bit of irony there, of course, because she is a female and Frank is typically a male name. But hey, now you know. So hopefully somebody doesn't pick this up in the middle of the podcast and go, who the heck is Frank? Is Tom married to a guy? No, I was married to a female. But a little background on my marriage. This was my first marriage, and I've since been remarried, and that will be a topic for a podcast on another day. It's frankly my second marriage is it's a great marriage. I mean, it's like anything; it's not perfect, but I don't want to get into that right now. But I certainly will address it someday. But the first marriage was incredibly dysfunctional, and there's a number of reasons for that, so it would probably be helpful to get a little bit of background. So my ex-wife and I, we got together when I was 22, she was 19, and she had already been married. She was married at 18 years old. She was dating a roommate of mine, and she'd been married, I think, for maybe 3 to 4 months. And granted, this situation is probably about 30 years ago, so some of the numbers may be a little bit inaccurate, but I don't think they're going to be grossly inaccurate. we worked at a restaurant together. I actually remember when she got married because she said something to me about getting married. I was like, "Oh, how old are you?" And she said, "Oh, I'm 18." I'm like, 18 seems really young to get married. And indeed it was. So she split up with him. I think she hooked up with at least one other guy before she hooked up with my roommate. And then after she hooked up with my roommate, she and I got together. We worked at a restaurant together in Rochester, New York. She was a waitress. I was a bartender. And in my personal life, now I had a child when I was 17, and he had been living with me off and on. His mother was from out of state. I lived in Rochester, New York. She lived in Denver, Colorado. And we having a child at age 17 is never a great idea. But she eventually came out. He lived with me for a short period of time. I wasn't in any real shape to take care of a kid, but I certainly did my best. And she wound up meeting a guy, and I don't remember if she got married at that time. I think she may have, but this is not my ex-wife. This is the son of the mother of my oldest son. Just follow along, folks. I'll try to be I'll try to make this as the least amount confusing as possible, because I'm starting to get confused. So I'd had a child at age 17. The mother was from out of state, and she lived in-state, out-of-state, in-state, out-of-state. My son had lived with me for a period of, I don't know, I think maybe a year or something. She came from Denver. She picked him up, took him back to Denver. And so out of the ashes of this emotional situation, I literally had lost a child. I mean, my child was taken from me and then moved out of state, and I wasn't able to see him. And I mean, if you want to talk about trauma, that's just a traumatic. I mean, unless you're one of those scumbag dudes that has a kid and just couldn't care less whatever happened to him, then it wouldn't affect you. But it had a profound effect on me. So at the time that I met Frank, I was dealing with all the emotions and the baggage that comes along with having my son move across country and no longer living in the same area. And I really enjoyed being a dad. I still do. It's weird because I'm sitting here sort of fumbling over my words, and it's because for some reason there was a point in my life, maybe it was even when I was like 10, 11, 12 years old, I just always wanted to be a dad. I just always wanted to have kids. And it was just inside me. So it really broke my heart when my son moved across the country. So then anyhow, I hooked up with Frank. And we had one night of amazing passion, and out of that amazing night of passion, she was given my child. There's an interesting way of putting it. And so here she was, still legally married to another guy. She's pregnant with my child, and what are you going to do? She's, I think, 18, 19 years old, and I'm 22 years old. I'm a bartender. She's a waitress. Things were kind of crazy. We figured out a way to kind of make it work. And in my mind, in this case, since I'd already had a child with someone who lived out of state and that child had moved away, there was really nothing that was going to stop me from being a really, really important part of this kid's life, even if that meant marrying her, staying with her, whatever. So I think it's weird in retrospect, and it's taken me so many years to just come to terms with this, but the foundation of our relationship was so horrible because we both kind of came together out of the ashes of this emotional turbulences in our lives. And she was coming out of a marriage when she was a young kid. And I know her parents loved the first husband. They thought he walked on water. And I was dealing with the emotional baggage of, my son having moved away. And so here we are together, comforting each other and being irresponsible in terms of birth control. And then we have a child. I don't need to tell you that the possibility of our marriage ever working out was probably slim to none. And you already know, kind of like the Titanic sinking at the end of the movie, that the marriage didn't work out because I've already told you that we've since moved way past it. And she's been remarried for many years. I've been remarried for many years. I know sometimes exes it always kind of cracks me up with my ex is my best friend, or we're really good friends. We get along so much better now that we're apart. That is absolutely not the case with Frank and I. I have tried over the years to have a cordial relationship with her. It just doesn't work for me. I don't know if she's made any genuine effort. I know she's made some efforts, but I just have no desire to have any kind of relationship with her beyond anything that's essential having to do with the kids. So in terms of the relationship starting out on such a horrible foundation, to me, though, it was important that our child have a mother and a father. And really, in the case of my oldest son, the reason that, at least in my mind, that I wasn't able to retain custody of him or even have a decent shot at retaining custody of him wasn't necessarily because of my age, or and maybe to a certain degree it was because of my gender, but it had more to do with the fact that we weren't married. And I actually had this conversation with my oldest son at one point, and he I think he got a little miffed at me, but he had a child before he was married, and I says, you need to marry her, because even if you're not going to stay together as a couple, you need to be able to be in a position legally to fight for visitation rights if something goes wrong. And there's probably people listening now going, that is the most horrible reason for people to get married. It's not a great reason, but it really isn't a bad reason. Trust me. So anyhow, we wound up getting married. Our child was about a year old when we got married. Her parents absolutely despised me almost as much as I despised them. And because they blamed me for breaking up her first marriage. And then, the other complication that we had is that she was a stay-at-home mom for the most part, worked part-time in the first few years of our kids' lives, but I still worked in the restaurant industry, and I was working as a bartender and a bar manager. So I worked some late nights, and there were times I wouldn't come home till 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. Now, I would still get up with our son because I loved the time with our kid. And I have a granddaughter that lives out here near us, and she's going to be 4 Sunday, the Sunday after I record this. And man, it's like watching those first 4 years again and reliving them. It's just magical, because I just love that age, when they're babies and you hold them. And man, when I worked late night in the restaurant industry, I would come home at 3 o'clock in the morning, and if Thom Jr. was up, I would just hold him, and the whole world would be still, and it would be just me and my kid. And man, those are great moments. But so we got married, and quickly there was an issue with my career, and it's because her parents they had worked at a company called Kodak for many years, and they were factory people, and they felt that I should have a 9-to-5 job and all the more stability. The issue is that when I was working as a bartender, I was making just bundles of money. I would say, adjusted for the cost of inflation, I probably made more money as a bartender than I have at any other occupation. There were nights that I just made. There were nights back in 1990 or 1991 that I made 3 times as much in tips in actual dollars than I make today bartending, just to put it in perspective. But her parents were very reluctant to that, so they constantly were giving her pressure. They were giving me pressure in terms of my chosen profession. And if you're going to hook up with somebody that is in the restaurant industry, if you're going to get married to them or start a relationship with them, and then you're married and go, wow, I really don't want to be married to somebody that's in the restaurant profession, then don't get married to them, because it's ridiculous to try to change the person after you're already in the relationship. And I hear that all the time. People go, oh, hate all the hours they work, and they do this and they do that, and I wish they'd change their jobs. And if you know what the job is going in, you either got to have that discussion before you make a long-term commitment, or you're going to have to just come to terms with that's what they do. So we started out with that being an issue. And, slowly just the pressures of life came, and this is where we finally lit up to the topic, which is marriage counseling. And I worked one night and I came home at, I don't know, 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning. And she was waiting. She was awake for me. She was really upset that I came home late. And I says, well, we just had a really busy night. We kind of hung out for drinks, for an hour afterwards. And she got really jealous and she assumed that I was, hanging out with another girl or something like that, which here 30 years later, I have no reason to lie about it. I absolutely wasn't. I really had I'm not going to say I had no interest in other women because, when you're in an early 20s and you're a male, of course you're going to have interests. You just don't act on them. And I didn't act on them. I valued my family too much to cheat at that point. But she got really mad at me. And so the next night I went to work and I came home and all the furniture was gone. Everything. I mean, all the paintings were taken off the wall. All the dishes were taken out of the kitchen. All the silverware was gone. The only thing that was left in the entire apartment, this was a 2-story townhouse in a suburb of Rochester that I was able to afford on a bartender's salary. There was nothing there. It was gone. It was stripped blank. And she'd actually called me at work to tell me, she goes, well, when you get home, I'm not going to be there and I've got our son. I'm just like, what on God's green earth is going on here? So I get home. Sure enough, everything is gone. And I just absolutely lose it. And I'm Irish, which there's a stereotype that Irish people have bad tempers. Maybe I fit that sometimes. I don't know. Ask my friends. And, but I was just utterly, I had every emotion that you could have within about an 8-minute time frame. I went from shock and bewilderment to deep depression, bawling, and then just nothing but pure anger. And I remember that it had a sliding glass door in the back of the apartment. And I just punched it with all my might. It just shattered. And then I just sat in the apartment and slept on the floor that night. Then next day, tried to figure out what the heck I was going to do with my life. It was horrible. And then out of that, this is where it turned out, we wound up talking within a few days, and she had said, her parents were behind it and they had encouraged her to do it. And I don't even know where they came up with the cockamamie idea to move everything out of the apartment as some form of shock, But then we decided that we were going to get back together, or I should say she decided, because she kind of held all the cards and held all the furniture. So she came back to the apartment. And they get everybody together. They get her parents and all their helpers and everything to move all the furniture back in. I mean, move it in like we just were moving into a new apartment. It was utterly bizarre. But part of the condition for us getting back together is I said, we really need to go and do some marriage counseling. I can't go through this type of thing again. And so we found a marriage counselor, and he was an interesting character. And I'll tell you, when it comes to marriage counseling, one of the things that I probably should have said at the beginning of the show that I may or may not have, when you choose a marriage counselor, it's one of the most important decisions that you're going to make in terms of your relationship and the direction of it. Now, this guy was one of those guys, and for the life of me, I wish I could remember his name, but we found him because he was some prominent marriage counselor guy. He was one of those people that advertised in a way that was similar to a personal injury attorney. So his name was very prominent. He was dressed really well, expensive clothing, always looked perfectly groomed, shaved head, zero facial hair, very commanding presence. I mean, this guy, when he spoke, he just sucked you in. So, he kind of sat us down, and I will say that one of the biggest problems I had in terms of utilizing this individual as a marriage counselor was that he was a lecturer, which is ironic because I'm literally lecturing right now. But he was the kind of guy that just lectured. It felt like he had a playbook that he used with pretty much every couple, and he would say this, that, and the other thing. And in all honesty, he was more adept at, and I think he preferred doing sex therapy, couples sexual counseling, or I think that's what it's called, the sex therapy. And I remember we had one session where he gave us a free sex therapy session of 30 minutes. It was like, well, as long as I got you here, if you want to take a test run of the sex therapy. And we went through this whole thing about, playing with rectums. Hopefully I don't have to put a parental advisory on it for that. I think the word rectum is probably fairly benign, but it was like, here's our marriage falling apart and we're both having all kinds of issues. And then he wants to do a half-hour session on, how we can improve our sex life by incorporating rectal stimulation. I never got around to trying it. I probably won't. And anyhow, so after that, after a few sessions, he decided that one of the core problems that we had in terms of our relationship was, one, obviously the employment situation with me, and two, the issues that were related to her parents and her parents interfering with our marriage. So for number one, his solution was that I become a postal carrier. He was I'm not sure why he decided that postal carrier was my destined profession, but he just, he gave me this whole long list of reasons why being a mailman would be good, because I'd get a lot of walking in, so it'd be good for my physical health and my weight, and, I get great benefits, all this stuff. And I really did not want to be a postal carrier, to be perfectly honest. And then secondarily, he requested that her parents sit in on one of the counseling sessions. And that was a problem, because her parents were pretty well convinced that they were absolutely not part of the problem. And with that, it was like, it was strange. I think one of the problems that we encountered with marriage counseling is that her parents eventually were not on board because they didn't want the marriage to succeed. And he brought her parents in, and then he also said to them that the idea of emptying the apartment of all the furniture as some form of shock therapy could have gone dangerously wrong. I mean, it could have been a situation where I had come home and killed myself because I was so distraught at what had happened. I'm fortunate that I'm not suicidal and never really have been. I mean, I've dealt with situational depression. I've dealt with deep depression, PTSD, things like that, but I've never really gotten to the point where I've been suicidal. But either way, I think his point was well taken that, you do something like that and it could have disastrous effects. But I think ultimately he also agreed that her parents were being a very negative influence on our marriage. And they were. So unfortunately, that just kind of stirred up the hornet's nest. But ultimately, the outcome was that the parents were ticked off that because the marriage counselor told them that they were interfering in our marriage. And so then Frank says, well, we're just not going to go to marriage counseling anymore, and we're just going to try to figure things out on our own. And I promise I'll not move stuff out of the house. The condition was I had to find a job outside of the restaurant industry, and I had to give up alcohol, which I did for, I don't even know, 10 years or so. No drinking at all. It's weird when I think back. And now I'm a raging alcoholic. No, not true. So, again, the alcohol thing was just, it was because my father was an alcoholic. So they would constantly, her parents would constantly say, well, if his father's an alcoholic, then the chances of him becoming an alcoholic are that much higher. So he just needs to not drink alcohol. So there it was, we decided, hey, I'll have to do this, I'll have to do that. You can't move the furniture out of the house, and we'll live happily ever after. And so the marriage counseling, I think the issue is that we went in, we discovered the root of the problem, which we knew what the root of the problem was. The marriage counselor attempted to involve the other parties and help mitigate the situation, but ultimately made the situation worse. And I think that a lot of that had to do with the fact that he was just not very diplomatic in his approach. He was very much a bull in the china shop kind of guy that was just, very frank and says, hey, you need to stay the heck out of that. And, we went in with the intent of repairing the foundation of the marriage, and in reality, what I think wound up happening is that we stirred up a lot of hornets' nests. There wound up being other sessions that we brought up issues that literally weren't even issues, and then became issues, and so there wound up being a lot more damage from that particular marriage counseling situation. Thing, whatever, than there was help. And again, that goes back to not choosing the right marriage counselor for the particular situation. I mean, in our case, we were a young couple. We had a child. We had all these, I had all my emotional baggage. She had all her emotional baggage. But at the end of the day, we had to determine whether we were compatible as a couple and able to function somehow and remain married. And we didn't do any of that. So nothing was resolved. So it was a failure. It was a marriage counseling fail. And what could have been done differently? I mean, again, I think a lot of things. I think there probably should have just been a little more care and whatnot. And who knows, it may have been at that point in our relationship, we would have had to come to terms with the fact that we just were not compatible as a couple. And that's tough because when you have a child, you really need to put forth every single ounce of effort in keeping that relationship together for the sake of the children, because children do better with their own mom and dad. That's just the reality. And I know that there's a lot of that mindset that it's like, well, if mom's happy or if dad's happy, then the child will be happy. I just don't buy that. I really don't. I think that there are studies that are out there that support the notion that even a semi-dysfunctional family, a mother and father, as long as there's no violence or child abuse or spousal abuse, then the kid's better off having a couple with a mediocre marriage and are at least able to raise a kid together than they are in a marriage where the parents have split up. Or I guess it wouldn't be a marriage if they had split up, would they? It would be a split up. But anyhow, that was marriage counseling fail number 1. I'm actually going to take just a bit of a break here between marriage counseling session number 1 and marriage counseling session 2. And I'll come back and I'll get to marriage counseling session 2, and then we'll talk about the ultimate outcome of both of these sessions of marriage counseling. And I am back. Well, it feels like today I'm just talking fast, but that's okay. Hopefully people are getting something out of it. So just to recap, marriage counseling session number 1 with my ex-wife Frank and I, and we wind up staying together. That was the early part of our marriage. I don't even think we had been married a full year by the time that we got out of it. Eventually, I did wind up leaving the restaurant industry. And with that came just a ton of resentment because, it's anybody, I think, that has been in a relationship where the partner has some kind of a demand that you make a change in your life that you don't want to make, then it's just going to breed resentment. And I loved the restaurant industry. I loved bartending. I love the people aspect of it. I still do it today because of that. I do it part-time. I don't have to do it for a living. And although I don't know, at some point it's going to have to end because I'm just getting a little bit too old for the late hours and just standing for 5 hours at a time. But for the most part, I still really enjoy it, the social aspect of it. And but we want to stay together. The relationship wound up being functional, for lack of a better term. I really was enjoying my time being a dad. And for whatever reason, we came to another sort of crossroads in our marriage, and our son was, coming up on 4 years old, and we decided that the best thing that you could do to solidify a relationship that has had many issues throughout its original 4 years is, hey, let's have another child, because this is what every relationship needs, is a fix-it baby. So we went ahead and decided that since we had somehow managed to cobble together 4 years of marriage, that we would have a second child, and that child was going to come into the world and be our little marriage savior. And it couldn't have been further from the truth. In fact, it wasn't even... Well, so about a year later, our son Trevor was born, and I don't know if she had postpartum, but she wound up having a pretty horrible extramarital affair. And man, I mean, we had, you hear that? You still hear that exasperation in my voice. I actually, see, now I remember this incorrectly, and this is where you come back. So I had to give up bartending, but I'd done all that. So we decided to have a second child. And at that point, I felt that our relationship was stable enough that I could go back into the restaurant industry. And so, because I hated working in factories and doing the 9-to-5 thing, so I wound up getting a job at Olive Garden. And Olive Garden was a great restaurant to work for. The hours weren't bad. I really didn't work past 10. The money was stupid. I mean, I had incredible bonuses. And back in when my son Trevor was born in 1993, I mean, the money I was making as an assistant manager at Olive Garden, and I only worked, it was one of those rare restaurant jobs that I didn't have to work 90 hours a week. I wound up making such good money that it wasn't until 3 years ago, 2008 or 9, that I actually made more annually than I made in 1993 working for Olive Garden as an assistant manager. I mean, it was, and I was loving life. We didn't have money problems. She didn't have to work. I was back in the restaurant industry as a manager. I oversaw a wait staff, so I had some authority. It was just, I was like, let me tell you, life was good. And had a new baby on the way. Baby was born, just a great kid, no real complications. We had a really nice house. We drove a nice vehicle. I mean, I felt like I'd finally arrived to suburbia. Here I was, finally the quasi success story in my, coming up on age 30. And not long afterwards, it all began to fall apart again. Lo and behold, what a shocker. And she wound up hooking up with a guy that, it's I don't know, guys. If your wife or girlfriend starts to have a best male friend, or, I mean, I would assume in a same-sex situation, if you were, if they have a best friend of the gender that they prefer to be with, it's probably not a good thing. And I've heard differing viewpoints on this, where it's like, oh, you can have a platonic relationship with someone of the opposite sex if you're heterosexual. I have yet to really see it work the majority of the time. It does work on occasion, and those are the ones that people point to because it is so rare. But yeah, so Frank wound up hooking up with this guy who, lo and behold, he worked at Kodak, which is where her parents worked at. And her parents loved this guy. And in fact, he had the same first name as her first husband, who they loved. And her parents actually encouraged her to pursue the relationship with this guy. So obviously marriage counseling was something that was going to work for us. Well, we decided that time to forego marriage counseling. We wound up having a trial separation. There wound up being all kinds of craziness going on there. And so much so that it literally warrants another full episode, which I promise I will do when I'm just not, when my brain can handle it. But so we went through that. We wound up getting back together. We stayed together for a while. Things started to stabilize, and we got about 10 years into our marriage. We moved out to a small town in Western New York, and we started our life over again, and where people really didn't know us, didn't know our history and the breakups and the police and all those things that come with like a crazy marriage. And things seemed to be going well for a while. And then she wound up getting, she was actually, ironically, she's working as a postal carrier for a little while, rural carrier, quit that job to go work as a prison guard and at a county jail. And I was working in sales. And so my hours were a little erratic, but for the most part, worked out of my home. I had to do some traveling, but it wasn't real extensive. And we had bought a house, so life was good. We're living in this rural community. We have a house. We have 2 kids. The kids are really good. Kids are really good. And that's so, what more could you want? Well, obviously what you would like is hopefully another extramarital affair to completely mess things up and then go from there, which is exactly what wound up happening. Now, she wound up having an affair with a guy that was a friend of a friend. So, just like, please just pick somebody I have no connection to, so it can be less personal. So she has an extramarital affair, and it's one of those crazy things. Like I'm sure that there's people out there who've experienced the same thing. When your partner's cheating on you, they figure out a way to reflect it back on you. Like somehow it's your paranoia. Like, I'm pretty sure you're cheating on me. Well, I'm not cheating on you. It's just your paranoia. And how dare you accuse me? I've read books and I've had experiences even working with high school kids that I think there's an old expression, "Methink thou doth protest too much." And there is a tendency when people are doing things that they're not supposed to be doing, that they come up with elaborate tales or they become overly offended. Whereas if you haven't done something, you almost have a tendency to feel and act a little bit on the guilty and ashamed side. So, when somebody says, "Hey, I think you're cheating on me," you're like, "Oh my God, I'm real. I don't even know what to say." Whereas if you are, a lot of times you'll have this reaction where it's like, "How dare you accuse me of cheating on you? I would never do that in a million years. On Thursday, I was doing this, and this, blah, blah, blah. This is all about your insecurities." And, so I kind of had to go through that, but it was getting evident that about 10 years in that the marriage was just not going to work. It was not going to work, but we decided that we were going to go to marriage counseling. And honestly, I don't know if her intent was in going to the marriage counselor to ultimately disband the marriage. I don't know. I think in some ways maybe that was the case. So the second marriage counselor, if you want to talk about bizarre and the absolute wrong reason to ever choose a marriage counselor, she was chosen because since I mentioned my ex worked as a corrections officer in a county jail, supposedly this particular marriage counselor only took cash for therapy sessions and didn't keep a record. So if for some reason you went through a divorce, then the records couldn't be subpoenaed. Now, there's probably an attorney or somebody out there that says, "Oh, that's utter nonsense. It's not, I don't know." This is what I'm told. And I'll tell you, I had to pay cash for every single one of the counseling sessions. And this counselor was actually counseling the couple of the guy that she was having her affair with. So, and he had a baby on the way. That couple, she was about 6 months pregnant, and I got a call from her that she had found my wife's bra at her house and that she had found condoms, and she knew her husband didn't need condoms because she was 6 months pregnant. And, she showed me the bra and gave me my car license plate, which was parked in front of her house when she was staying somewhere with friends or something. But, because, hey, listen, if you're going to cheat in a small town, just please be as obvious as you can about it. But, in spite of all these evidences, it was ultimately supposedly my paranoia that was driving this situation. And so we went to this marriage counselor, and at first it became, this whole thing where the marriage counselor would say to me, like, oh, I think the problem is, Tom, that you're very mentally ill and very insecure, and you have this family background of mental illness, which, they loved her family loved to bring up at any opportunity that they had to make sure that they knew that I was a defective, mentally defective individual. And you notice how the bitterness has reduced over the years? It really has. It really has, actually. You should have heard me 25 years ago when I talked about this stuff. But so this was sort of the early stages of the marriage counseling. It was like, oh, Tom's just paranoid. This just isn't really going on. Well, the problem came when at some point the marriage counselor turned on my ex and was like, I don't know, man, a lot of this stuff that you're saying about this guy just isn't holding weight. And in terms of your relationship with this coworker of yours, I don't think you're being honest. And she got super offended and then, of course, refused to go to marriage counseling anymore. And ultimately, I wound up having an individual session with her because we were both supposed to show up, and then she just refused to show up because she felt that the marriage counselor had disrespected her. And the marriage counselor said to me, she says, well, I can't really tell you for sure if she's having an affair with this other person because they're my client as well. But since we don't really keep official records of these counseling sessions, so you probably need to make arrangements to get divorced, get an attorney. And I really, in retrospect, I really should have listened to that advice. I really should have. And I didn't. I mean, we wound up staying together about another year. She moved out. We had just a horrible divorce. And I think that the failure of that particular marriage counseling session was that our relationship had come to a point where it was at a point of no return. We weren't going to salvage it. There was too much damage from the years and years of, everybody having to make adjustments, her wanting me to be something that I couldn't be, me wanting her to be something that she absolutely did not want to be. And I think that she had harbored a lot of resentment because she didn't want to have a child at a young age. And I was the one that made her a mother at a young age. And I think we even had conversations to that effect in our marriage counseling sessions. But so instead of, having an actual opportunity to just sit down and say, you know what, we need to figure out an exit strategy that's not going to turn into a messy and drawn out divorce. We just kind of pretended like nothing happened. So I knew that she'd had the affair, but I got to the point where I couldn't really bring it up. And she would still deny it, even though it was clear that she did it. And then she wound up having an affair with another guy. And that's actually the guy she wound up being, is still married to this day, is that second coworker. But, we were just very different people. And, in terms of her infidelity, I mean, it was rampant. It was constant throughout our marriage. So there really was no trust. And after the first affair, I never trusted her again. And she would always say, well, the only reason I cheat on you is because you don't trust me, which didn't make any sense to me. But it made a little sense to me because, yeah, I really didn't trust her. And I probably should have just said, you know what, I don't trust you. But I would always be like, of course I trust you. It's like, no, I don't trust you. I really don't trust you. I'm never going to trust you. And, as far as me being unfaithful, I was never unfaithful during our marriage. And this is going to sound really bizarre, but there's a part of me that really regrets that on a lot of levels. And I think that there were certainly people that I was interested in. And I know that there was one time that we separated and I'd met a young lady that I was absolutely head over heels in love with. And wound up leaving her to go back to Frank, which I think was kind of it was a tough decision. But it was complex because, as is the case with many of the relationships I had before my current wife, who was the only normal human being that I've ever dated in my life. And if you're one of my exes and you hear this, yeah, whatever. You could probably say the same thing about me. But, she was pregnant by another guy, and I was going to stay with her and help her raise the baby of another child, which, boy, that would have worked out real well for me too. So instead I decided to go back to my ex-wife and try to raise my own kids, which I did. And I don't regret that. I don't regret, raising my kids. I don't regret, fighting for them for as many years as I did, and eventually getting custody and eventually being able to raise them. But in terms of being unfaithful, I regret not being unfaithful, because I think that if I had cheated on my ex-wife, I would have understood her better. Like, I would have understood how she felt. And I think on some level it would have leveled the playing field. And this isn't me trying to play righteous and saying, oh, I'm the nice guy that didn't cheat on his ex-wife. I mean, the reality is that I just didn't, I'm just not that type. Like, it's just really hard for me. I just can't, I don't have the unfaithful gene in me. I don't know if it's my Catholic upbringing. I don't know if it's the fact that, my parents, in spite of all their dysfunctional marriage and the anger and violence and everything like that, there was just never a hint of infidelity. So it's just not something I was ever exposed to, and therefore just really couldn't conceptualize it. I still really can't conceptualize it. So that just created a sort of a chasm between the two of us in our relationship that made it so that not necessarily that if I had cheated and she had cheated, we would have leveled the playing field and our marriage would have worked. I don't think that it would have worked at all. But I think what could have potentially happened is that it could have gotten us both to a place where we would have been able to separate and eventually divorce in a more civil way, and on some level not have kind of the anger and resentment. And I think a lot of the issues that we had post divorce and even now just come back to how the divorce was handled, which was ridiculous. And there was just a lot of interference from a lot of different parties and things like that. But I think ultimately, if you at least understand your partner, and you go, maybe, again, if we had gone into that second marriage counseling session, instead of trying to save a failing marriage, we could have gone into it with the mindset of, look, there's obviously been infidelity on both ends of the relationship. Let's figure out a way to kind of get out of it. But unfortunately, what wound up happening is, especially in that second one, is, you got the one person that's already mentally left the marriage, which was Frank. And then you had me, the guy that's trying to hold on to it for dear life, for practical reasons, because, I needed her income into the household because we had just bought a house, because I was worried about my reputation in a small community because I didn't want to be a divorced 30-year-old guy. And obviously I had concern for my children. I wanted my kids to have a mother and father. And I don't think there's a parent out there on the planet that likes sharing time with their kids. I mean, I hated it when they had to go over to their mothers for visitation, and I was the custodial parent. I mean, there were occasions where it's like, hey, I want to go on a date, or I want to go to a concert, I want to do something like that. It's nice to send the kids over to their mom's house, but I hated it. I hated it every time. I hated it right down to the core of my soul. It's my kids. I don't want to share custody of my kids. What kind of human being ever wants to do that? You do it because you have to. You don't do it because you want to. And again, if it was a situation where we had felt better about each other as individuals, then that situation could have been mitigated a little bit as well. If I'm sending my kids over to my ex's house and at least we're civil and I don't have this, pure hatred. And again, we're talking, I said we split up 21 years ago, and I would never just hang out with her. I mean, I don't have an all-consuming hatred of her, but I certainly don't like her. And I dread, if we have, when my kids gets married and she's going to have to be there and everything. It's like I still just don't like being in the same room with a woman. And could marriage counseling have taken care of some of that? I think it probably could have. I really do think it probably could have. So again, I think that hopefully that's the takeaway. And I know that there was a lot of things and things went into different directions. And there's probably some stories in this particular episode that are not necessarily fully fleshed out. But, my hope is that if people do decide to seek counseling, that they seek the counseling that is appropriate for the particular situation. If you have, again, if you're dealing with PTSD, you need a different type of counseling than if you are bipolar. And if you're both bipolar and PTSD, you need a different type of counseling altogether. So it's just important if you're going to decide to go into counseling. And I think too is that couples really need to discuss what their end game is. Like, what do you want out of this? Like, are we really trying to salvage a marriage that neither one of us are happy in? And I think I've made that mistake in subsequent relationships, not my current marriage. And but in many ways, it kind of set the groundwork for my current marriage, because I knew that I didn't want to be in a situation where I didn't have the trust, or I had to deal with, the infidelity or arguing, all that stuff that's just so freaking stressful. And I just don't need the headaches. And, but again, if you're going into these marriage counseling situations, you need to discuss and say, are we going to try to save this thing? Are we going to try to get out of this in a civil way? Do we want to be with somebody else? And I think that's a discussion as well. I mean, it's like, if you do want to be with somebody else, then just do yourself a favor and leave the marriage and leave it in a way that's respectful and honest. We dealt with a lot of those issues. I mean, it was so clear that neither one of us wanted to be with the other one. But as a guy, it's so tough to come to terms with the fact that your woman's, having sex with another dude. And there's a whole layer of societal things that come with that. It's like, oh, this guy's better than I, and all those things. And there's so many things that just really attack your senses that it's hard to just be real about it sometimes and say, well, maybe it just comes down to the fact that this other individual is better for me. And that was absolutely the case for both of us. We were never good for each other. We were good for each other for one night when we made our oldest son, and we tried to chase that one night of passion and recreate it. It's almost like a drug addiction, where the first night, you do the drug and it's great, and then you try to find that high again. You never find it. But again, if you do decide to take the marriage counseling route, what is a route? Hopefully you learned something a little bit from today, or maybe, you just found some of my crazy relationship stories interesting. I don't know. It's my own. You are indeed my counselor in listening to all of these stories of my past that I'm coming to terms with. But I do want to say thank you again for everybody that's listened to the podcast. We have a great guest coming up in our next episode, gentleman by the name of Sky Sands, and you'll definitely want to catch that one. And if you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, by all means, message me through the Facebook page, or people know how to find me. But I promise we'll have some good guests and hopefully some good topics. Keep listening, keep sharing, keep doing all those kind of stuff. And remember, if any of you REO Speedwagon fans are out there, keep yourself together, keep everybody warm, and always remember to keep riding the storm out, people. All right, this is Thom Jennings, your host. Thank you again for listening to this episode of Bagel Logic.